There are literally hundreds of different aircraft types, built by dozens of different companies from around the world. There are jets, turboprops, planes with reciprocating engines, helicopters, and sailplanes. Whatever power plant these different aircraft may use, they all have one thing in common. They all generate some degree of wake turbulence. Wake turbulence is a dangerous and potentially deadly threat to aircraft. In this episode, we will cover what it is, how and why it happens, what separation controllers are required to apply to different weight classes of aircraft, and finally, we will look at some examples in our radar lab of how to apply these separation standards. My name is Kyle Warner. I'm an air traffic control student here at the University of North Dakota. Thank you for tuning in to learn about wake turbulence separation in the terminal radar environment today on ATCast.
Thank you. JetBlue 1264 Boston, ground taxi ramp via November and Alpha. Boston Tower, Gulfstream 717, I perform with you on the ILS 4 right approach. Say there's 741 is checking out. 741 Boston Tower, good evening, thanks for calling 737, just inside Melton, I'm like clear land, touch by 1017, 1005. 417, thanks for the service, terminates, clock VFR for exchange, we'll see you back. Go 117, okay, good night now.
Let's start out by defining what wake turbulence is. The Pilot Controller Glossary defines wake turbulence as phenomena resulting from the passage of an aircraft through the atmosphere. The term includes vortices, thrust stream turbulence, jet blast, jet wash, propeller wash, and rotor wash both on the ground and in the air. Simply put, wake turbulence is generated by an aircraft as it moves through the air. Airplanes can fly because air flows faster over the curved upper surface of the wing than it does across the straight lower surface. This faster moving air has lower pressure than the slow moving air underneath the wing. This differential between the low pressure air above the wing and the high pressure air underneath creates lift, which pushes the aircraft into the air. However, air doesn't just flow straight over the wing surface, it also flows down the length of the wing as it moves through the air. When the low pressure air from the upper wing surface meets the high pressure air from the lower wing surface at the wingtip, a vortex forms. NASA has conducted research on this phenomenon. In this video, an L-1011 flies past a tower that is generating several different colors of smoke. At first, nothing seems to happen. At about 25 seconds, the effects begin to show in the smoke trails. By 45 seconds, the vortex is quite apparent. Even though the effect is not immediate, when it does happen, you can easily see the violence of the vortex. Now imagine flying a small aircraft into this turbulence, and you will understand the importance of wake turbulence separation. Vortices initially descend at a rate of 300 to 500 feet per minute for about 30 seconds, and then the descent slowly decreases and levels off about 500 to 900 feet below the flight path of the generating aircraft. Notice that an aircraft's flight path may not necessarily correspond to its location. In climbs or descents, the aircraft will be above or below its actual flight path. For example, if a heavy aircraft is climbing and a small aircraft passes underneath, it may still encounter the larger aircraft's wake, even if the small aircraft is 1,000 feet or more below the larger plane. Lateral movement of the vortices is much harder to determine, as it is affected by the atmospheric conditions such as wind and air density. With winds at 0 knots, the vortices will move down and away from the flight path of the generating aircraft. Light winds may cause the vortices to slowly drift across its flight path, keeping one vortex behind the aircraft for a longer period of time. Strong winds can blow the vortices out of line with the generating aircraft's flight path, posing a threat to other aircraft traveling parallel to its course. Vortices generally dissipate after 2 to 3 minutes, depending on the size of the generating aircraft. On helicopters in forward flight, vortices form at the tips of the rotor blades in the same manner as at the wingtips of a fixed-wing aircraft. After formation, the vortices behave the same way, descending about 900 feet below the helicopter's flight path, and depending on the wind, moving laterally away from its flight path. Vortices vary in size and strength depending on the size, weight, speed, and configuration of the aircraft that is generating them. Heavy aircraft, such as 747s, generate very powerful vortices that can pose a threat to smaller aircraft, particularly at low altitudes. Aircraft generate the greatest amount of wake turbulence when flying slow, with a clean configuration and at high angles of attack. In other words, the greatest amount of wake turbulence is generated during the final approach phase of flight. Aircraft caught in another plane's wake can experience effects ranging from moderate to severe turbulence, violent rolling and pitching, structural damage, and even total loss of control. Since your job is primarily to ensure safety, remember that as a controller, you can issue a cautionary wake turbulence advisory whenever you feel it is necessary, even if aircraft are properly separated. The FAA has established separation standards to help account for the turbulence produced by aircraft. These separation standards are in addition to the standard radar separation of 3 miles within the terminal radar environment. We will take a look at the radar wake turbulence separation minima, as laid out in the 7110.65. This information can be found in Chapter 5, Section 5 under the heading Wake Turbulence Application. First of all, let's define what the weight classes are. A small aircraft is defined as an aircraft with a maximum certified takeoff weight of 41,000 pounds. A large aircraft has a maximum certified takeoff weight of more than 41,000 pounds up to 255,000 pounds. A heavy aircraft has a maximum certified takeoff weight of more than 255,000 pounds. Here is a summary of what the .65 says. Keep in mind that these standards only apply to aircraft at the same altitude or less than 1,000 feet above or below the leading aircraft. If a heavy is following a heavy, there must be at least 4 miles of separation. The same rule applies to a large or heavy behind a Boeing 757. If a small is following a Boeing 757, there must be at least 5 miles between the aircraft. Finally, if a small or large is following a heavy, it must be at least 5 miles behind the heavy. Things get a little more complicated for small aircraft on final approach to the same runway behind larger aircraft. The requirements apply to small aircraft whether they are performing a full stop landing, touch and go, stop and go, or a low approach. If a small is following a large on final, it must be at least 4 miles behind the large. If it is following a Boeing 757, the small must be at least 5 miles in trail behind the 757. Finally, the small must be at least 6 miles behind any heavy aircraft. The first thing to do when taking a handoff from another facility is to look at the aircraft type. The data tag will show an H before the aircraft type, and your flight progress strip will tell you if it is a heavy by having an H before the aircraft type in Block 3. You should become familiar with the different air carrier, general aviation, and military aircraft types. These can be found in Appendix A of the .65. Within the terminal environment, you must use the word heavy when referring to a heavy aircraft, whether you are talking on the radio, on a landline, or even face-to-face with another controller. State the word heavy after the aircraft call sign. Once you see that you are dealing with a heavy, Boeing 757, large, or small aircraft, determine how much separation you need between that aircraft and your other traffic. Memorizing the information in the .65 will help you quickly determine the proper separation needed. When you are ready to turn an aircraft onto final, you must take into account the weight class of that aircraft. Be especially mindful if it is a heavy aircraft, and don't just look at the aircraft you are working. Be aware of what aircraft other sectors are controlling. For example, if approach south is turning a heavy onto final, the north controller must apply proper separation between the heavy and whatever type of aircraft he or she is turning onto final. In this case, south has cleared a 747 for an ILS approach to runway 28 right, and north is clearing a CRJ for the same runway. The CRJ is a large, and the 747 is a heavy. There must be 5 miles between those two aircraft at all times until the 747 crosses the landing threshold. Remember that the radar controller is responsible for maintaining separation until the aircraft crosses the landing threshold. In this example, south is clearing a 747 for an ILS approach to runway 28 right, and north is clearing a Cessna 172 for the same approach. The Cessna is a small following a heavy on final, so there must be at least 6 miles in between these aircraft until the 747 crosses the landing threshold. You can achieve separation on final in a number of ways. Just a few examples are extending your downwind, delaying the turn onto final, or issuing a speed restriction. Remember that the leading aircraft will begin slowing down about 8 to 10 miles from the airport, so you must build in some extra distance to accommodate this. The bottom line is that wake turbulence separation must be maintained until the leading aircraft crosses the landing threshold. Now for a quick review. Wake turbulence vortices are formed when the low-pressure air from the upper wing surface meets the high-pressure air from the lower wing surface as the two streams of air flow down the length of the wing and meet at the wingtip. These vortices descend and move away from the flight path of the generating aircraft, depending on the winds. Aircraft that encounter vortices from larger aircraft can experience severe turbulence and rolls, resulting in damage or loss of life. The FAA's wake turbulence separation standards can be found in the 7110.65, in Chapter 5, Section 5, under wake turbulence application. These standards must be maintained until the leading aircraft crosses the landing threshold. Be mindful of the aircraft types under your control, and under the control of other sectors you must coordinate with. In the case of Academy Airport, both north and south approach controllers are responsible for maintaining wake turbulence separation between each other's aircraft on final.